guy out of the kerosene. It's been soaking for a little bit. This is the second billet that I forged the other day. Just haven't gotten back to it, so I'm going to get on it tonight and get this one here pounded out to about 1/4 of an inch thick and about 8 inches long. This one here is currently about 1 1/4 inches wide, if that, by about 4.5 inches long. It's started out as 9 layers, 15N20, 1095 layered steel, which we forged down. I think this one here ended up around 6 or 7 inches in length. Once we cut off the delaminated ends and the rough edges, we were left with this little piece. So it's plenty. It'll give me the second piece to a billet of Sanmai that I'm going to be doing, or that I'm working on. The jacket, I'm going to put jacket on this, which will be 1095 jacketing, and I'll put a more than likely 1/4 inch thick 1095 core. We'll get that forged in, and we'll make maybe hopefully 2 razors out of it. It's a lengthy process. Hopefully we can get some decent stuff out of it. But it's solid. It welded up nicely. No delaminations. So yeah, good piece. So anyway, we're gonna get the forge fired up and start working on it. Warm, all the kerosene's burning off, protecting the core, give it a little bit, and we'll start beating on it. At this point, the billet has been in the forge for about 15 to 20 minutes to come up to temperature. I am using a flattening hammer and an Estwing 4-pound sledge. I always use a cheap run-of-the-mill hammer to use to flatten the billet, rather than using a good hammer. If you mar up the face of a cheap hammer, it's not that big of a deal. You can always go back if you really wanted to. You can go back and reface it. Rather reface a cheap one than one of my good hammers. So we're going to continue to do this flattening, basically forging the 2 billets together to make one cohesive billet. I do this 6 heats, so 3 heats per side, in order to make sure that the weld has set properly. That way there's not going to be any delaminating pieces or sections of the billet. From there we go on to using the rounded face. It's a slight round, it's nothing too aggressive, but it's a rounded face straight peen hammer. This hammer I picked up from a gentleman out in Alberta, Sean from Front Step Forge. This is my second hammer. He actually made my my flattening hammer as well. So we're going to go through this process several times because we need to now stretch out the billet. Need to bring it up to about, I think I was shooting for 8 inches, but I think I got it up to around 7.5. That just allows me to cut off the end sections, make sure that I have a good clean piece of steel with no delaminations in the front or the back or anywhere along the sides. So we're going to continue this process for a little bit. Getting the billet back out of the forge. I believe this is going to be the second to last heat that we take on this billet. We're using the peening, the straight peen part of the hammer. Getting pretty close to the desired length. Should be close to about 7.5 inches, which is the final. Just double checking it with another billet that I made previous. Back in the fire, go in for one more heat. Do a little more stretching, a little more flattening, and we should be getting pretty close. Well, I deleted the file that showed the forging of the two billets that I made to the core and the jackets. Not a big deal. It's basically the same thing as what we already saw. Just more heating, more pounding, more forging, a little bit of sweat. But we're at the point now where we are setting up the actual profile to the razor. Cleaning up the tang a little bit, removing some excess metal. That way, I don't have to grind off too much with the round wheel. Let some sparks fly. This is a great machine. This is a Nexus grinder, company out of Canada. Nexus Grinders, go figure. App name. Switching out from a flat platen to my 10-inch wheel. This will get the curvature on the spine kind of set to where I want it, and then we'll actually open it up with a larger wheel. I go to a 12-inch right after this, just to smooth out the transition from where I'm going to put jimping, just before the tang. Clean that up a little bit, pretty it up. Switch out from that, go over to my 12. Clean up all the dust off the wheel, because that's important when you're making more dust. In this one here, we left at a square point. I don't do a lot of square points, and I really do enjoy making them. I usually do a lot of butcher notches or bull noses. Square points are just, I think they're kind of elegant, they're kind of clean looking. Nothing really super fancy, but they just kind of hold their own weight. Right here we got a 6-inch, if I'm not mistaken, a 6-inch wheel, and we're just cleaning up the tang, getting the curvature set on that, using a push block, that way I don't burn my hand again, burn my fingers off. Gets rather hot. And we'll dump that one out, grab the small wheel attachment, get the thumb notch put in. Get that all nice and smoothed out. And get her ready for some tang shaping.
Yeah, get that thing off. There it is. A fully shaped, profiled. It's going to be a square point razor. I still have to do the flats. Still got some hammer marks, some hammer impressions there. and at the top. This side here is pretty smooth, but we'll get to that now. Okay, so we've got the impressions out of the spine, the hammer marks. Still got the one down here, but that's no big deal. That'll be ground away when I do the hollow grinds. I did a quick etch on it, and the center core looks like it's pretty decently centered. It's a little wavy, but I think that'll be fine when I grind away. It's such a fine edge, it'll stay in the center. Next up, I got to do the 1/16 inch hole for the scales to attach to, and then yeah, get on to doing some hollow grinding. Oh, yeah, I'm gonna have to taper the tang first before I do the hollow grinding, so that'll be up next. Okay, where's my eyeglasses? Don't have any around. Back to the shield. Okay, this is not brain surgery. We all know how to drill holes. Got this cold cut stuff. Seems to work pretty good. Cold cut lubricant.
You know, I said it's not brain surgery when drilling holes, and it really isn't. The best thing you can do is have patience. You know, keep your drill bit lubed. Make sure that you're always using a sharp drill bit. Drill bits are cheap, especially these 16th inch ones. What really sucks is when you break off one of these 16th inch drill bits in the spine, or actually in the tang of the razor, and you spend the next 2 hours trying to dig it out of the hole. And you're not going to drill it out because it's hardened steel, so you just, you know, make one problem after another. So just take your time, use a pecking motion when you're drilling, and keep the chips off the drill bit and keep the hole nice and clean, and you're good to go.
We'll do a quick chamfer with this tiny little guy. Need to get a speed check. That'd be a good idea. Marked out, did the center lines on the tang, on the blade, on the nose. So now what we're going to do is we're going to taper the tang. I don't have one of those fancy tables to do tapering. So what I tend to do, I grab a 1, 2, 3 block, can't twist clamp, and I line up the edge, as my helmet falls off, I line up the edge of the 1, 2, 3 block with just before the hole. I don't know if you can see that at all. Clamp her down. That should be plenty. Nice and tight. And we'll just taper it there. And we'll taper it down to those lines, to the outside lines. So we're going to be taking off, I don't know, probably about 1/16 of an inch off of each side. It's going to be a beefy razor. I may have to keep this one for myself. Maybe. Unless somebody really wants to buy it. But we'll go. We'll see what happens. Anyway, we'll get this going.
Alright, so we set up the work rest in the flat platen. Got a used 80 grit ceramic belt on here. And we're just working it back and forth. Now occasionally the blade does get out of position, so you just got to be cognizant of that and readjust it and put it back into position. As long as you catch it before it moves, too far out of whack, you're not going to do any kind of damage. Get a nice clean edge on that one, set it up for the other side, and move over to the other side and do the same thing. Just patience and, keeping an eye on what's going on. And again, just readjusting, making sure everything's locked down properly, and just taking your time.
That's just rough in anyway. It's not that big of a deal. That's going to be touched up when I do the flattening of the tang. So that's what it looks like there so far. You see the ledge. That ledge will get removed when I do the flattening. You see it's quite a bit tapered. It's a very thick razor. This thing is massive. I'll probably take it down a wee bit, but we'll work on that. All right, so from there, okay, next step is we are going to put a 45 on the bottom edge of the tang so that it meets up with the center line, or get it close to the center line. So, take a table, spinner, get out our trusty degrees gauge, and right there is 44.7. I might go a little bit more on this one. Bring it down to 48. 48 and a half. Like with that thickness of spine, it's going to need a little bit more. Put on a worn out 80. Yeah, it's still got some decent grip to it, but it's not as aggressive as that last belt I was using. I'm gonna put my mask on too. Relatively quick and painless. Got a nice taper. Let's see all that well. Thinned out. Come on, focus. Yeah, there it is. Now again, this is just rough. Comes down to a nice thin point. That'll just allow, it will allow when the razor is in its in the scales, when it opens up, will be able to clear the insides of the scales so it doesn't get bound up on its thickness. All right, so we'll do some jimping on the flat and then we'll start doing the hollow.
Now we're back at it. We've got the machine set up with a 10-inch grinding wheel and a 36 grit ceramic belt. I actually like to use not so much worn out, but used 36 grit belts. Brand new belts are fantastic, but these 36s, when they're brand new, they're pretty grabby. They're kind of sticky, and they tend to make your work kind of bounce around on the belt itself. So I like to use them when they're, mildly used. They still hog off a ton of material without being so grabby. So it's definitely a belt of choice for myself. I'm going to hog off a fair bit of material, still leaving a decent amount of core material for the heat treat. That way it ensures that we're not going to see any warping, any distortion in the blade during the heat treating process and the tempering process.
Part's done. At the beginning of the hollow grind, just a rough grind. Left a lot of meat on there so we could do a heat treat and not worry about it warping at all. It's pretty well centered. I don't know if you can see that at all. But yeah, that's that. And I'm going to do a quick test etch to see how the layers came out. I can see a little bit of it right now. Looks pretty good. But yeah, go from there.
Well, we're back at the grinder, 10-inch wheel, brand new 60 grit ceramic belt. Just cleaning everything up, hogging off a ton of material. Thinning out the blade. Getting my plunge lines nice and clean. Getting it ready for the next grit, which is going to be a brand new 80 grit ceramic belt. And just going through the same process, cleaning it up, smoothing things out, and thinning out that blade. Gotta make sure that edge is super thin. We've switched out the 80 grit for a 120, and we're just going to continue on thinning out the blade. Keeping an eye on the center line and making sure everything stays, nice and proportional on both sides. Trying to remove the same amount of material on both sides. Keeping an eye on the spine, where the grind line is on the going up to the spine. That's pretty essential when it comes to sharpening it. You want to make sure that you have the same spine thickness on either side of the razor. That way everything sharpens properly, you have the proper geometry. So we're just going to take our time, get rid of some more material, keep cooling off the blade, making sure you don't overheat it. Well, at this point I've gotten the blade down to a thickness that I like, and I've just switched over to a 240 aluminum oxide belt. just to remove some of the deeper scratches that the 120 left. It's not going to help a huge amount, but it'll save me a little bit of time in hand sanding. And we're just going to go through the process, cleaning up the plunge line a little bit, smoothing things out, and we're going to switch over to a 12-inch. We're going to use that 240 to do the spine work, cleaning up that stuff. That way I don't have to do a lot of hand sanding there. And putting some bevel edges on the front of the blade, cleaning up the handle, cleaning up the spine, and just going through the process.
So this all plays into a bump.
Maybe not. Hey.
9% battery power use.
Well, at this point, it's time to move on to doing the scale work. I've already epoxied black G10 liner to a piece of stabilized and dyed blue hemp wood. It's a really nice material. It's super hard. Really pretty. Polishes up absolutely spectacularly. We're taking care of the sharp edges on the G10, and then we'll just start rounding over the edges of the scales, getting them nice and cleaned up, taking care of any hot spots, making sure that everything's nicely rounded over, and flattening out the surface as well, getting rid of the prior grit lines to make it a little bit easier just to do a little bit of hand sanding. I'll take it over to the bench and do 800 grit, and then I'll take it over to the polishing wheel and get them nice and shiny. Alright, well now we're back onto the bench vise. We've got the scales locked down. That vise sure does move a lot. It doesn't seem to move at all when I'm doing this. The table usually seems like it moves more than the actual vise, but I guess I need to throw that front bolt in there. Tried to cheap out a little bit and use 2 bolts rather than 4. I'll have to lock it down. But anyway, we're using 800 grit on this, removing any of the previous scratch marks that the belt grinder may have left. This goes rather quickly. It's the type of hand sanding that we don't mind doing. Wood is definitely a heck of a lot easier to work with than metal. Actually, this is quite a joy doing. Moves along quite quickly, and we see some really nice results.
Okay, so now what we're going to do is figure out where the wedge needs to stop before the blade. So what we do is I typically just grab a 16th inch drill bit, pop it in, pivot hole, pop it into the scale, and measure off. Pretty simple. All right. Now, that little dotted line there will give us where the end of the wedge placement needs to be. And we'll do that on both sides and cut the wedge.
Well, now we are doing the glue up of the wedge onto the scales. I've roughed up the area that the wedge is going to go to. I usually use a 80 grit sandpaper, just rough up that edge, and then I use the scribe to gouge some lines into that end, just give it a little more adhesion. And I just realized that I didn't provide a before and after picture of the razor. I've let the razor sit in coffee for about 18 hours, if I'm not mistaken. I like to let them go a little bit longer. You know, the material itself is always handled. Your fingers are always on it. And I think with the longer coffee etch, it just provides a thicker oxide, and it just gives you a little more, it gives you a little bit better wear. It's eventually gonna, rub off. It does wear after a period of time, but it does look fantastic. It gives a really nice contrast between the 15N20 and the 1095. And it looks to be like I didn't really frame this one too well. I'm missing a lot of it. But anyway, we're just gluing up the scales. I got a pin through the pivot point, just to keep everything nice and straight, while those little can't twist clamps keep everything stable. Well, now we have the epoxy cured. The handles are attached to the wedge. Everything's nice and straight. And it's time to file down the brass rod, set the washers, and just peen over the brass rod so it looks nice and clean. We're going to take several light strikes. We're just using the weight of the hammer to set the peen on these pieces of brass. They're pretty thin. They're a 1/16 of an inch in diameter, so it doesn't take a lot. You don't want to get too aggressive with it because you don't want to bend it. You just want to make sure that it mushrooms over. And once this all is completed, we'll take it and we'll hit it on the polisher, and that'll remove any kind of sharp edges and obviously polish up the brass. And we're in the home stretch. This is the last operation to do. We're just going to use another brass rod through the pivot point. A couple of brass washers on the inside of the scales for the razor to ride against. And of course you drop it. At least it didn't go on the floor and lose it forever. Once we get this done, we'll go back, file down the rod to the appropriate length, peen it over, and it'll all be done.
Okay. Start pinning that together.